Kate Woodcroft was a highly respected prosecutor in Britain who had handled the most high-profile cases. Now on Christmas Eve, she had as usual stayed late at work to review the materials of a case that had become a personal challenge for her. Not long before, the dazzling beauty Sophie Whitehouse had attended a party hosted by her friends, Mark and Ellie Frisk. Her husband, an influential politician, was running late, but everyone was understanding. At his level, balancing work and personal life was no easy task. Still, Sophie left James a voicemail, asking him to hurry up. 44-year-old James Whitehouse, a member of parliament from the Tory party, was well respected by ordinary citizens. But today an urgent call had made him uneasy. At that moment Sophie was discussing her upcoming family vacation with friends when she received a message from her husband, asking her to meet him at home immediately. Sophie had to leave under a polite pretext. On his way home, James was thinking frantically. He had to safeguard his reputation, but even he had secrets, and one of them had just come to light. It threatened to destroy both his career and his family. When Sophie arrived home, she had no idea what kind of conversation awaited her, but from her husband's expression, she quickly realized it was bad. James admitted that he had screwed up. Sophie immediately guessed it was about another woman. James said the name, Olivia Lytton, a parliamentary analyst. It had lasted about 5 months, and James had broken things off with Olivia 2 weeks ago, after the conference. James assured his wife that it wasn't love, just an affair. Now Sophie only wanted to know why he was telling her about it. Was Olivia pregnant? James said that wasn't the issue. The real problem was that his affair had become public knowledge and would soon be in all the newspapers. Now they had to think about how to protect their children. But the hardest battle would be with the journalists. In the present, Kate Woodcroft received a call from her friend Richard, who invited her to join his lively party. But Kate declined. She didn't like large crowds. Instead, she focused on reviewing the upcoming case in detail. Shortly before, the Whitehouses had met with Chris Clark, the parliamentary secretary, who explained what they were up against. By tomorrow every newspaper would be plastered with scandalous headlines about how the beloved member of parliament and father of 2 had been having fun with his mistress. Hearing this, Sophie felt on the verge of a panic attack, recalling their last family vacation. From the outside their life had seemed perfect, an example to follow. Sophie immediately searched online for photos of Olivia, a young and beautiful woman. At that moment stress made her physically sick. It took an enormous effort for her to pull herself together and step into the men's argument. Chris only wanted to be sure that Sophie wouldn't pull any surprises, like filing for divorce. Of course Sophie wasn't going to leave her husband after 12 years of marriage, especially since they had 2 children. James only hoped he wouldn't have to resign. Chris advised James not to deny the affair to the journalists but to simply confess and repent. If he denied it, he would only make things worse for himself. The couple didn't realize that their daughter, Emily, had been sitting on the stairs the entire time, eavesdropping on their conversation. Sophie quickly rushed to put her to bed. James tried to make it as clear as possible to Chris that he would do whatever it took to keep his family together. Now more than ever, James needed his wife's support. Sophie was deeply disappointed in her husband, especially by the fact that his affair had lasted 5 months. That meant Olivia hadn't been just a one-time fling, no matter how much he tried to deny it. James fully admitted his wrongdoing. At some point Sophie grew tired of his excuses and simply went to bed. If he could turn back time, James wouldn't have made this mistake. He recalled how he had run into Olivia outside the Parliament building. She had captivated him instantly. James still couldn't forgive himself for his weakness. He simply had to fix everything. That night, neither James nor Sophie slept. Nothing would ever be the same again. In the morning, Sophie wanted to believe that the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a bad dream, but unfortunately they weren't. James had already given an interview, admitting that he had made a mistake and acted disrespectfully toward both his marriage and his voters. But from now on, he was willing to do anything to earn his wife's forgiveness and restore the public's trust. Sophie met with her close friend, Ellie Frisk. Sophie tried to pretend that everything was fine in her family. Ellie joked that if infidelity destroyed all marriages, there wouldn't be a single intact family left at their children's school. Of course this high-profile case couldn't go unnoticed by the Prime Minister, Tom Southern. For now, he was on James's side, but only on the condition that there wasn't anything even more terrible. James assured him there wasn't. Tom simply advised him to take care of his wife. Sophie was trying to shield her children, Emily and Finn, from everything that was happening. Their nanny, Christina, helped her raise them. Sophie remembered her college years when she had just broken free from her parents' supervision. She first met James at a youth party. Holly Berry, Sophie's reserved classmate, was there too. Now Sophie's perfect life was on the verge of falling apart. James proposed an amendment to the law concerning migrant workers' rights, but many other members of Parliament pointed out his connection with a much younger subordinate. After all, James was a member of the Conservative Party. The Prime Minister knew that James was a talented politician, so in his opinion, this scandal would soon die down. Tonight James prepared dinner for the family and raised a toast to Sophie, calling her the most wonderful woman. Nervous, Sophie accidentally spilled her champagne. Her hands were trembling, and her thoughts were a mess. James didn't know how to regain his wife's trust. Even during the holidays, Kate Woodcroft kept working while her husband spent time with their children. Kate was still not entirely sure whether she should take on this scandalous case. And she had reasons to hesitate. Not long before, Sophie had been trying to cope with everything that had fallen on her shoulders. In public, she had to keep up appearances and ignore the judgmental looks. All attention was now on their family. Journalists were hounding Sophie, asking her to comment on her husband's affair. It was getting harder for her to cope, but she had no choice. Sophie was doing it for the sake of her family's stability. Today the couple dined at a restaurant and ran into an old acquaintance, Lawrence, who was certain that soon everyone would forget about this scandal. Lawrence himself had once been in a similar situation, and his wife had forgiven him. He never made that mistake again. Sophie told James that she wouldn't tolerate his behavior like her mother did. She had always believed their marriage was special. James in turn told his wife that family was the most important thing to him. He was even willing to resign if she wanted him to. Without her, he couldn't see his future. Sophie was willing to give her husband a chance, though making this decision wasn't easy for her. She clung to the past. All her friends envied her because it seemed like James had no flaws. And Sophie had truly believed that, dreaming of marrying him. In the present, Kate meticulously studied the case materials, while in the past, James was basking in triumph when Parliament approved his proposal. But his mood darkened when outside two detectives approached him with the intention of asking him a few questions about Olivia Litton, who accused him of forcing her into something she didn't want. At that moment James felt as if the ground had been pulled from under his feet. That evening upon returning home, James told his wife about it, declaring that Olivia's accusations were absurd. The trial was approaching. Kate was determined to win this case, even though many believed Olivia had falsely accused James. The press wouldn't leave the White House couple alone. Sophie was horrified by what her life had turned into. Angela Regan would be James's lawyer. He stood trial for a serious charge. Naturally James denied his guilt. The prosecution and defense agreed that they needed 3 months to prepare. Until the verdict was issued, James had to surrender his passport and was forbidden from disturbing Olivia in any way. Later, Kate discussed this with her assistant Maggie. Interestingly, the Prime Minister was still on White House's side. Parliament decided to remove James from his position and also called into question his proposal to amend the law on migrant workers' rights. Many members of Parliament did not support the Prime Minister's decision to stand by James' White House. Tom countered these objections by stating that until the court ruled otherwise, James was presumed innocent. Chris persistently advised the Prime Minister to distance himself from James, otherwise his reputation might suffer. But Tom remained firm in his opinion. For now at least. Ellie did not invite Sophie to the next formal dinner because her husband, Mark, also a politician, was meeting with voters. This could harm Mark's reputation. Sophie wants her children to understand that everything happening is just a misunderstanding. To distract them, James gave them a puppy. He hoped this would help keep the family together. Kate never planned to have children, but it happened. She got married and had a child. She is managing with the help of her friend, Ali, who advised her not to get involved in James White House's case. But it's too late because the process has already begun. Chris Clark insists that James should avoid drawing too much attention to himself, as other past affairs could come to light. But James assured him that Olivia was the only one. Sophie hates Olivia for lying and trying to destroy James because of their breakup. She also wants James to meet and talk with Tom Southern. The Prime Minister directly asked James if he had done it. James gave a firm no. In that case, Tom promised to handle everything. In the distant past, both James and Tom were members of the exclusive Libertino Club. Their parties were filled with alcohol and other things that went beyond moral boundaries. If this came to light now, a scandal would undoubtedly break out. That is how politics works. Kate met with her friend and colleague, Richard. Kate shared that Maggie, trusting her instincts, believes James is guilty. Once upon a time Kate studied under Richard and became one of the best. They share a deep connection. James told his wife that Tom is on their side. Sophie said she made a foolish mistake when she abandoned her career as a children's writer. Now Sophie has no job, only her family, even though she graduated from one of the best universities. When the trial is over, Sophie plans to find work. James supported his wife's decision. She does not want to appear in court, but James insisted. Now more than ever, he needs her support. Sophie believes James is innocent, but no one can predict what will happen in 3 months. In the past, when Sophie was in university, she befriended Holly, even though they were very different. Sophie, with her striking appearance, preferred entertainment, unlike Holly, and was used to leveraging her beauty to receive academic leniency. Now Sophie wants to become independent again. She must be strong for her children. James, on the other hand, wants to keep his family and his good name intact. But he cannot manage without his wife's help. Sophie found the strength to attend the trial. The judge instructed the jury not to browse the internet or conduct their own investigations to avoid bias. They must rely solely on real evidence. Kate, representing the prosecution, took the floor. James was previously the Home Secretary and a respected member of the Conservative Party. It is alleged that a week after James ended his affair with Olivia, he subjected her to unacceptable actions. The purpose of this trial is to determine the truth. The first witness was called Olivia Clarissa Lytton, a former parliamentary analyst who studied at Cambridge and earned a degree in political science. According to her, the office atmosphere in Parliament was friendly. She deeply respected James. At some point, Olivia and James grew closer when they ran into each other outside Parliament after Olivia had been at a bar with friends. James offered her a drink, and she agreed. They had a pleasant chat, everything was decent. At first, things went too far when James booked a hotel room. Their relationship lasted 5 months until James decided to end it. For Olivia, this was difficult, but she handled the breakup with dignity, assuring him it would not affect her work. Olivia admitted that she did not want the breakup because she loved James, so in the following days, she kept thinking about how to hide her emotions. Hearing this, Sophie could not take it and left the courtroom, hailing a taxi. Sophie felt physically unwell. Maybe James had lied, and he actually loved Olivia too? Sophie was on edge. At home, James assured his wife that even if Olivia had loved him, it was not mutual. Sophie believed her husband again. Kate always stays late at work, all days of the week are the same to her, but her colleagues have gotten used to it. Maggie expressed the thought that Olivia was convincing in court. Kate responded that this is always the case with the truth. Maggie also managed to dig a little into James's past. There were rumors that at the Libertino Club parties, some very questionable things took place. The time had come for another hearing, and Olivia once again testified, recounting the conference on October 12. According to her, James was very upset by an unpleasant comment from a familiar journalist at the New York Times. Olivia had tried to calm James down, mentioning that he could be cruel and arrogant, but sometimes those qualities seemed attractive. Olivia's words unsettled many in the courtroom, and the prosecutor asked her to clarify what she meant. Olivia did not hide the fact that at that moment, her feelings for James had not yet faded. In the elevator, passion flared between them, and at first Olivia was happy, thinking their relationship might still be rekindled. But with each passing moment, James's actions became more insistent and aggressive. Olivia was very afraid that someone might catch them there. She was also terrified of everything James was doing. It wasn't just the physical aspect, it affected her psyche as well. When asked whether she was certain she had not wanted what happened, Olivia gave an ambiguous response. As she recounted this, she cried. Sophie didn't even know what to feel at that moment. Could her husband, the man she had known for so many years, really have done such a thing? After the hearing, the prosecutor and the defense attorney were having drinks at a bar, discussing the case. There was almost no evidence, but in any case it was up to the jury to decide. The spouses learned that a vote of no confidence was soon to take place in Parliament. Many members of Parliament doubted that Tom Southern should remain as Prime Minister. Chris Clark once again strongly advised the Prime Minister to distance himself from James' White House, as the public simply had no reason to sympathize with him. However, Tom was not willing to abandon an old friend in trouble. Perhaps he had a reason that extended far beyond friendship. Another hearing took place. Olivia testified again. Angela Regan was convinced that Olivia had a significant reason to slander James. She likely wanted revenge for their breakup. Angela pointed out several inconsistencies in Olivia's account, highlighting the fact that Olivia had clearly followed James into the elevator voluntarily. She hadn't even called for help. Moreover, this was far from the first time Olivia and James had met alone in the parliamentary office. Olivia felt that her arguments were powerless against the defense, as she had indeed repeatedly met with James at work. Angela Regan also noted that Olivia had not said no to James in the elevator, she had only said not here. Everything indicated that what had happened was consensual, no matter how much Olivia tried to deny it. Silence fell. The defense's argument sounded more than convincing. Would Kate be able to prove otherwise? James was now trying to be a good father to his children, spending all his time with them. Seeing them laugh, Olivia couldn't help but smile. That evening just before dinner, there was an unexpected knock at the door. It was enraged Chris Clark, who announced that an administrator from Oxford had come to the police, claiming that James had assaulted a girl in the past. Since the girl had chosen not to press charges, the administrator had not reported it to the police, but upon learning about the trial, she decided to come forward. Upon hearing that the girl's name was Holly Berry, Sophie remembered that she had been her classmate. Chris now intended to persuade the Prime Minister to publicly renounce James. Sophie felt she could no longer endure this. James, however, hurried to call Tom and tell him about his conversation with Chris. James denied ever harming Holly. Unfortunately, Tom was still forced to make a difficult decision, to distance himself from James in order to appease the members of Parliament. James reminded Tom of his long-standing debt. They had a secret from the past. James had not wanted to resort to blackmail and threats, but he had no choice, after all he had once saved Tom's golden future. Not wanting to hear any more, Tom hung up while James recalled how many years ago, during another party at their exclusive Liberty Club, Tom had offered substances to everyone, despite James's attempts to dissuade him. James had hurried to get his friend out of there when Tom could barely stand. However, their third companion, Alik, under the influence of the substances and convinced he could fly, was determined to take a step off the edge. Moreover, Tom had egged him on, and Alik jumped. That jump proved fatal for him. The young men could have stayed and called an ambulance, but instead they ran away. It was Tom who had given Alik the substances and told him to jump, which meant he could be held accountable. But James had assured him that there were no witnesses, so no one would ever know. Tom had told James that he owed him forever, and the two had embraced before going their separate ways. Seeing police sirens, James panicked and started running, until he suddenly collided with Holly. In the present, Tom was desperately trying to convince his wife that nothing had happened between him and Holly, but Sophie no longer believed him. How many women like Olivia and Holly had there been? Sophie was haunted by nightmares of Holly coming to her. Meanwhile, Kate confided in Richard, who among other things was also her lover, that she was worried about Olivia, who had become a pawn in this whole process. The last hearing had clearly been unsuccessful. Richard, however, didn't see James as a criminal but rather as just another womanizer. Richard himself was married and unfaithful to his wife, yet for some reason Kate found excuses for him. It was simply convenient for her. Neither of them was any better than James. Sophie remembered going to see Holly again to borrow her notes. But this time something was wrong. Holly was hastily packing her things and crying. When Sophie tried to find out what had happened, Holly rudely chased her away. Sophie was used to hiding her emotions, but she no longer had the strength to do so. She wanted to believe that James was a good person and hadn't done what he was accused of. Chris called James to find out what he had said to the Prime Minister that had made him change his mind again and continue supporting him. James evasively replied that the Prime Minister had simply made a well-considered decision. This time Sophie had no intention of attending the hearing. She planned to take the children to James's parents' countryside home because the situation at school had become unbearable. She also didn't want to listen to Olivia's friend's testimony. Kate and Angela discussed the police report filed by the administrator from Cambridge. In any case, it couldn't be added to the case, especially since Holly Berry had long since moved to Australia and wasn't even in contact with her family. The question was, who had initiated the report? Kate directly asked Maggie whether she had spoken to the police about Whitehouse's past in Oxford. Maggie assured her she hadn't. She wouldn't have done anything without her mentor's knowledge. Kate was very anxious about the upcoming hearing. Or was she hiding something? James remained under the relentless scrutiny of the press. Journalists followed his every move. As planned, Sophie took the children out of the city to stay with their grandparents. Naturally, James's parents were convinced that Olivia had falsely accused him. Mrs. Whitehouse had noticed James's tendency to lie since childhood, but she never considered it a problem. After all, any politician had to be a good liar. Mrs. Whitehouse also knew that Sophie was so determined to preserve her marriage because her own parents had been divorced. That was what a good wife was supposed to do. At the next hearing, Kitty Ledger, Olivia's best friend, testified. It was Kitty who had convinced Olivia to go to the police, calling James's actions violent. Olivia had hesitated for 2 weeks before finally filing a report. But Angela was convinced that Kitty had only urged her friend to report James because she disapproved of Olivia's relationship with her boss. Kate was deeply disappointed with the outcome of today's hearing. At this rate, she wouldn't win the case. James returned home before his wife. Only Christina was there. James tried to say something in Russian because Christina was from Russia. It amused her. James was genuinely grateful to Christina for taking care of his children. They were very lucky to have her. Kate drowned her worries in alcohol. Something was definitely troubling her. Sophie and the children returned late from James's parents' home. She realized she couldn't let go of the past and continue pretending. It wasn't just about Olivia anymore, It was about Holly too. Sophie had reason to believe that James really might have been involved with Holly as well. James insisted that Holly had never interested him and that he didn't remember anything from 20 years ago. Sophie was starting to doubt her own memories. What was the truth, and what was a lie? Sophie recalled the university graduation party, where even Holly had been present. Everyone was having a great time. James had left early, while Sophie had stayed. Like everyone else, Holly had gotten drunk and danced the night away. At some point, feeling unwell, she decided to leave the party. Staggering, she made her way across the campus. Somewhere nearby, police sirens could be heard. Suddenly Holly ran into frightened James, who didn't even remember her name. For the first time in her life, someone called Holly beautiful, so she responded to the kiss, but she didn't want it to go any further. However, James didn't care about her opinion. For Holly, it was her first experience. When it was over, James hugged Holly and ran away, leaving her in a state of shock. Holly Berry had long since changed her name to Kate Woodcroft. Neither James, nor Sophie, nor Tom knew who she was. But Kate knew for certain that James was a criminal. For the first time in many years, Kate called her mother. That same evening, Kate visited her friend Ali and told her the whole truth. If it came to light that Kate was acquainted with the defendant, a scandal would break out, but the scandal would be even bigger if everyone found out what James had done. Ali couldn't understand how Kate could look into the eyes of the man who had done this to her and gotten away with it. Sophie remembered how on the night after the party, James came to her. He was trembling and said that something terrible had happened. Sophie didn't want to know the details but was ready to confirm James's alibi if necessary. Emily didn't want to go back to school, but her parents decided it was for the best. Soon the verdict would be delivered, and James was confident he would be acquitted. Olivia had no solid evidence against him. Today is the decisive day, both James and Sophie understand that. Before the final hearing began, James spoke with Angela Regan. Everything depended on how the jury perceived him. Angela also warned that Kate Woodcroft was very cunning. Kate's face seemed familiar to Sophie, but she couldn't remember where she had seen her before. When Angela mentioned that everyone was still looking for Holly Berry, it made Kate nervous. She couldn't allow her true identity to be revealed. That would turn everything upside down. Kate had only one chance to get revenge on James. The judge declared the hearing open. James testified, stating that his affair with Miss Litton had been a huge mistake. But he assured everyone that it was the first and last time and that he loved his wife. Sophie still couldn't come to terms with the fact that while she was on vacation in Corsica with the kids, James was entertaining himself with his mistress and showering her with expensive gifts. According to the attorney, this indicated that their relationship was serious. When asked whether Olivia's feelings were mutual, James gave in and answered yes. James claimed that it was Olivia who had called the elevator and invited him inside. Previously she had insisted that it was the other way around. But James maintained that it wasn't him, it was Olivia who had initiated what happened between them in the elevator. Now the most important thing was to determine whether Olivia had given her consent. Was there a clear yes or no? James explained that he was 100% certain that Olivia had shown her interest in every possible way. Listening to this, Kate felt growing anxiety. It was her turn to question the defendant. James denied that Olivia had expressed any kind of refusal. At one point when the prosecutor started pressing him more insistently, James suddenly realized who was standing before him. It was that same girl, Holly Berry. James managed to pull himself together and with cold composure, stood his ground against Kate, repeating over and over that he had never harmed Olivia and that this was just her way of taking revenge for the breakup. James also hinted to Kate that he had figured everything out. He didn't deny that he had been highly active with women in the past, but he insisted he had never crossed the line. However, some women behaved unethically themselves and then tried to shift all the responsibility onto the other party. When the prosecution had no more questions, James and Kate's eyes met. Leaving the courthouse, the White House couple barely managed to push through the crowd of journalists to their car. James apologized to his wife for stating in court that he had loved Olivia. It was merely a strategy to give weight to his words. After this hearing, Kate could not recover for a long time. She cannot allow James to win. The walk from the car to the house was also accompanied by a crowd of journalists. Christina and the children surprised the couple by congratulating them on their anniversary. Sophie tried not to show her true emotions in front of the children, but she failed miserably. Suddenly she hurriedly left. It was already late at night, yet Kate was still at work. She was preparing her final speech for court. Kate never expected to see Sophie. Clearly they had something to discuss. Sophie was here because Kate's face seemed familiar to her. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had met before. Perhaps they had studied together at Oxford? Kate stated that she had studied in Liverpool. But Sophie was certain she had seen Kate somewhere before. Could Kate have known Holly Berry? Kate denied it. Apologizing for the disturbance, Sophie left. Outside she broke into a run, feeling an impending panic attack. Upon returning home, Kate told Ali that Sophie had recognized her. If the White Houses made this public, it would destroy Kate. She might even be arrested. For Sophie, her family had always been her top priority, and she was not ready to lose everything now. But one question remained unanswered. What had happened between James and Holly 20 years ago on campus? James couldn't sleep. Tomorrow the jury's verdict would determine whether he remained free or went to prison. To be completely honest with his wife, James decided to confess that after the graduation party, a spontaneous passion had arisen between him and Holly right there on campus. They were both drunk, and when it was over, Holly was clearly shaken. But James was certain that everything had been consensual. However, perhaps it did not meet Holly's expectations, which was why she considered his actions unacceptable. Sophie did not want to believe what she had just heard, but it turned out that this was not the only thing James had been hiding all these years. He told her the truth about how Alik had actually died. James had been forced to lie to protect Tom, his friend. Sophie in turn had lied for James, providing him with an alibi. James emphasized that she had chosen not to learn the details herself. He had no more secrets from her. Today the jury must decide who is lying, James or Olivia. First, the prosecution had its say. Kate continued to insist that Olivia had not consented to what had happened in the Parliament office elevator and that a criminal cannot be acquitted because of his status. Then it was the defense's turn. Angela Regan explained that James had no motive to force Olivia into anything because she had loved him and wanted to rekindle their relationship, which she did not deny. The court adjourned for deliberations. Kate was not sure she could handle it, but there was no turning back. She could not show her true emotions to anyone, especially to Angela, who wanted to close the case as quickly as possible. While her husband remained in court, Sophie returned home to the children. They believed that their father would be acquitted since their family had never lost anything. Sophie had no idea what to say. She was prepared for any outcome. Maggie informed Kate that the jury had reached a verdict. As she entered the courthouse, Kate nearly collided with James. Today it would be decided who would win. The judge asked the jury to announce the verdict. They found James Whitehouse not guilty. At that moment Chris whispered to Sophie that they had gotten lucky once again. All charges against James were dropped. This was not the outcome Kate had expected. As she was leaving, she ran into Sophie and held her gaze for a moment. Outside the courthouse, the press was already waiting for the White Houses. James gave a brief statement, declaring that the truth had prevailed. He also publicly expressed his gratitude to his wife. Sophie has always played her role. It seemed that their family's nightmare was finally over. Watching James's interview on television, Kate felt a helpless rage. Unable to hold it in, she smashed the TV screen and then screamed in despair. Ali came to support her. James shared good news with his wife. He would soon be reinstated at the ministry. Their streak of bad luck was over, yet Sophie was still filled with doubt. Maybe Olivia had never consented at all, and James had simply perceived it as a game? Seeking answers late at night, Sophie visited Ali, a former professor at Oxford. Sophie explained that she was looking for Holly Berry to clarify something with her. Flustered, Ali said she had not kept in touch with anyone from Oxford. But at the same time she understood that Sophie knew the truth. As soon as Sophie left, Ali immediately called Kate and told her about the conversation. Kate met with Richard and confessed that Kate was not even her real name. She also admitted that she had known James Whitehouse and had been his victim in the past. If Kate came forward, her career would be destroyed, but she could no longer carry this burden. Sophie told James that she wanted a divorce. Now that she understood the truth was just a plaything in James's hands, she realized she didn't want to live like this. All these years, Sophie had not known who her husband truly was, or who she herself was. James was ready to beg his wife to stay, but she had already made up her mind. If Sophie stayed, what kind of people would their children grow up to be? James was devastated. Kate met with Sophie, and for the first time in 20 years, they had a real conversation. Though Kate had changed significantly, both in appearance and in the way she spoke, the details gave her away. Sophie was here to confirm that her husband was a criminal. She already knew the truth. She had no intention of taking Kate, who had played a dishonest game, to court, but she would press charges against James. On the night of the graduation party, besides the incident with Kate, other terrible things had happened, specifically Alik's death. And Sophie wanted the truth to come to light. Tom was arrested, as was James. One way or another, they would pay for their past sins. For the first time in a long while, Sophie felt free. Kate, who was in fact Holly, also felt a great weight lift from her soul. Life goes on. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.